So for this demo, I have a piece of curly maple veneer glued to a piece of poplar. And to prepare this for the stain, I'm going to sand this with 120 and then 180 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander. Since the dyes that I'm using are water-based, I'm going to go ahead and pre-raise the grain, just spraying some regular tap water on the surface. And now I'm just going to take a paper towel and wipe off the excess water. All right, and so I'm going to let this dry for the next 6 hours, probably overnight, and then come back and sand it. And for the J.E. Moser's aniline dye, what I'm going to do is put 4 ounces of water on this hot plate and bring it to almost a boil. And this is just your typical hot plate, single burner. It's electric. And I'm going to let this come up to temperature to where you see bubbles at the bottom, but it's not exactly boiling. So now I'm going to pour the water in the container here. And now I'm going to stir it for a minute or two. Get everything mixed around in here. And then after we're done, we're going to just let this set and cool before we use it. All right, and the second dye that I'm going to be demoing is a liquid-based dye. It is the Trans Tint Honey Amber. So like before, I'm just going to heat this one up. 4 ounces of water. Probably 30 drops. Mix it around here a little bit. And the final dye that I'm going to be using are the Kita dyes. This is a royal blue. I'll take a 1/4 teaspoon. Wow, this stuff is really potent. That blue is just awesome. Just a 1/4 teaspoon of the Kita dyes. And this thing is really blue. All right, I'm going to let this set. All of these cool off, and then we'll be back to sand the board and apply the stains, or the dyes. The veneer is dried, so I'm going to sand it back down with 180 grit to smooth it out after raising the grain. So first up, I'm going to put some blue on this right side, seeing as how I somehow already got some on there from the powder. So I'm just taking a paper towel. I'm going to soak it up. And I'm just going to keep the surface soaking wet for roughly 5 minutes before I come back and wipe it off. And depending on how it looks, I may come back and apply a second coat. All right, and while that one is soaking in, I'm going to go ahead and apply the Honey Amber Maple from J.E. Moser's. Oh yeah, this just has an old antique look to it that curly maple looks awesome on. You want to keep the surface soaking wet with this stuff to get as much penetration as possible. And finally, the Honey Amber. All right, I'm going to wipe them off real quick and let them dry. All right, I'm going to let these dry, and then I'll come back and put a top coat on them. So far, these look pretty awesome. All right, so what I did was I came back and applied a second coat. I didn't feel that the first coat would give it enough, I guess, dye for an accurate representation. So I've gone ahead and applied the second coat just the same way that I applied the first coat. And I'm just going to let it sit here for a minute. And if you come back and there's some dust on the surface, you can take a maroon Scotch-Brite pad and lightly hit the surface with it. And hopefully that'll remove the majority of the dust nibs. And the next part of the recipe is going to be to apply a thick, heavy coat of a boiled linseed oil. And I'm just going to apply it with a foam brush and soak the surface for a good 5 minutes and let it sit on the surface and stay wet before wiping it off. And this will help pop the grain and just make this curly maple look awesome. You want to keep an eye on the finish, and if you see any dry spots, flood it with more oil. And you want to keep coming back to the board for the next 5 minutes or so, and just keep an eye on it. All right, it's been about 5 minutes now, so what I'm going to do is come back and wipe off any excess oil that's sitting on the surface. All right, I'm pausing the video to mention that I lost a couple of video files. So where we are was I let the oil dry for a couple of days, and then I applied a coat of full-strength seal coat shellac straight from the can. We're just using the hake brush, and I let it dry. And so now what you're seeing is after the first coat of shellac has dried. All right, the first coat's dried. I've got some 400 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to sand the surface to smooth it out. All right, so now I'm going to switch over to a 1 pound cut of this shellac, and that is just cutting this 50-50 with some denatured alcohol. And once again, I'm going to apply it with my hake brush. And I'm still getting some bleeding from this blue dye. I'm not quite sure why. That first coat should have sealed it. I want to mention that after several coats of shellac, I was still getting bleed back from the Kita dyes, the blue dye. So you want to take that into consideration. I'm not sure if I feel comfortable recommending that blue dye, but it had amazing results other than the bleeding. All right, this is the third coat of shellac, but first I'm going to sand with some 400 grit sandpaper. And it's time for the third coat. These brushes hold a lot of shellac in them, so keep an eye out for any runs. I've got 4 good coats of shellac on this finish, and now I'm ready to finish the finish using some steel wool and some paste wax. So what we're doing now is we're waxing the surface, but we're also taking the sheen down a little bit, and we're giving the shellac a consistent appearance. So now I'm just going to take a paper towel and remove the excess wax. And what you're left with is a glass smooth surface and a nice consistent sheen. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This is one of the many ways that you can dye curly maple to pop the grain and to give you an awesome look. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next build video.